we will talk today about John Locke, but actually splitting up this chapter into 3 lectures rather than 1, because I think that there's quite a lot there which is not in the book. So some of this material is important in order to understand what's going on, and then in order to get to Immanuel Kant, who we'll talk about next week. So just a few announcements before we get into that. Few changes which I do actually want to do. One of them is instead of having the review at the beginning of class or something with all these questions, what I will do now is a little bit different. I will actually mark rather clearly the slides during the presentation which answer those questions on the review, which hopefully you guys do have in front of you, like printed it out and actually have it. So what the idea is that you should be able to prepare for these questions on the exam as we go along, rather than have them all in one spot. And the reason is, it seems like some people are not watching anything other than this tiny part of the video with the review, which of course is not what I would like you guys to do. I want you to watch the entire video and to see the entire thing, rather than just get very quickly the answers to those questions. So for this reason, again, no more review after today. We'll just do the review as we go along through the class. But you will see that the actual slides are clearly marked, and I will make an emphasis on those questions. So as long as you watch the entire thing, that should not be any more difficult, but you do need to watch the entire thing, either live as we are doing it right now, or if you are missing the class, or if, for example, you are in one of the classes which do not have access to this live sessions, then you should watch it at your own time, be it the same day, next day, whenever it's available, whenever it's convenient for you, but you still should watch it. Okay, another little change is, if you look at the syllabus, it says that Hume is on Wednesday, but I think on Wednesday we'll do Berkeley and Hume will be on Monday. You still have a homework on Hume, but homework is based on chapter in the book. So as long as you read the chapter, you shouldn't have any problem with the homework, which is still due this Sunday. And finally, the exam has been moved a little bit. Remember, if you look at the syllabus, it says it's April 12th. I think that it is a little too far removed, so I don't want to have it before the spring break, but I will move it to the first day after the spring break, which is Monday, April 5th. So I will change the syllabus and upload the new syllabus, but in either case, you do have a fair warning right now. So the second exam will be right after the spring break, April 5th. Everything about it will be exactly the same as before. And if you look at the questions on the review, they go as far as Kant. There is nothing after Kant. We will cover Kant before the spring break, so you should have all the material. And well, how you prepare is up to you, but spring break is a rather large period of time. If you need to prepare for the exam, that should give you plenty of time to do so. And if you prefer to do it before the spring break and then just after the spring break take the exam right away, it's up to you. You may do it this way. Okay, so this is the changes. Now, since we did not have this before, we will for the last time do the little review of the last class with the questions for the exam. So what is the first thing Descartes comes to know with certainty? That's the first question. Exactly, that he exists. That's the correct answer. Good job, Maria. No, looks like that is actually your first extra credit. Okay. Now, how did Descartes prove the existence of God? And by the way, there will still be extra credit. It's just not going to be at the beginning of class. It will be more spread out throughout the class. But I will be asking questions, so that could help you. Mind-body dualism. That's how he proved the existence of God. How does it prove the existence of God? Remember, he actually had two proofs of the existence of God there. Now, let's look at the first one. What was the first proof of the existence of God he presented? Why did he think he has good reason to believe God exists? Exactly. The idea of God cannot come from nothing. That's what he said. That's the proof. I have this idea of God as the perfect, greatest thing. Where did it come from? It could not have come from any other source but God himself. Therefore, God exists. Rather easy, breezy first proof of the existence of God, based on the idea that the cause cannot be less than the effect. It has to be at least as great as the effect. So the cause in this case God, and the effect is the idea of God. So in order for me to have the idea of God who is so great, actual God must be even greater. That is more or less his reasoning there. Whether it's sound or not, that we did kind of discuss it. Hopefully you guys made your own mind about that. And then remember, he also gives a second proof later on, but don't worry about it too much. The first proof is what this question is asking. Now, how does he prove the existence of the world after that? Because remember, when he started, he made sure that he exists. That he determined. Then he also find out God exists, because he has the idea of God. But how did he prove the existence of the world? How did he prove the existence of this pen, or the room he's in, and so on? That's how he proved the existence of the world. How does this prove the existence of the world? That proves his existence. That's what he started with. He is thinking. He exists. Cool. Maybe he's the only thing. There's nothing else. Well, again, Cartesian dualism comes after that. Note that there's actually a question right after this. What is Cartesian dualism? So when I ask this question, that's where Cartesian dualism comes in. But how did he prove the existence of the world? Okay, so again, remember the steps there. The first step, he did make sure he exists. We can all agree with him on that one. I think, therefore I am. Something's doing the thinking. That must be me. So at least I exist. Then note that the next step, he found the idea of God in his head, in his thoughts. So he proved the existence of God. Why did he doubt the world existed? He doubted it because he thought, as an experiment, maybe there's a malicious demon who is deceiving him. But once he found the idea of God is of a perfect, good, the best thing ever. And then his reasoning becomes very simple. Well, if the God exists and he is so perfect and tells the truth all the time, he's not going to lie to me. That's his proof. This whole world which I see around me is given to me by God. And God is the truth itself. So he could not have possibly lied. Therefore, the world exists. And remember, we actually had a discussion when we also asked, well, but even if the world didn't exist and the God would just given us an idea of the world, would he even be a deceiver? Descartes thinks he would be, but the problem with it is this. If that's the only world there is, even if it is a phantom world, how is it a lie? What's the lie about? Did God ever met Descartes or any one of us and said, this world is absolutely real, I promise you that? No. He has no obligation for that. So Descartes' reasoning does seem a little weak on that point, but he thinks that that actually proves the existence of the world. Okay, and now the Cartesian dualism. What the hell is it? What's the Cartesian dualism? So, Abba, did you already answer this question? We didn't ask it yet. The soul and body are independent but work with one another. Okay, can you clarify how is that a dualism? Why does he even think that there are separate things? Soul and body. Remember, Aristotle actually thought that was more or less the same thing. Many ancient Greek philosophers thought that was more or less the same thing. The soul is part of the body. It's like, for example, is the shape of the statue and the bronze of which statue is made two separate things? Well, kinda, but not really. I mean, they are clearly cannot be separated. Okay, well, Louis, that is the answer, I guess, to the question of Cartesian dualism. So, good job. But still the question remains, why does he think there are two of them? Why did he separate them? Why did he say that there's a mind and body and they are separate? Exactly. I can doubt my body, but I cannot doubt my mind. And to him that proves they are different types of things. He can doubt one of them, but he cannot doubt the other one. Again, whether it is a good proof that they are two different kinds of things, I don't know. A lot of philosophers disagree with him, but he thinks it's a good proof that they are totally separate kind of things. He can imagine himself without the body. He cannot imagine himself without the mind. Therefore, there are two different substances, as he called it. Okay, good job. All right, and the final question, how does Descartes justify his dualism? Actually, we already answered that. Yeah, that's the justification. So, he can doubt his mind, but he cannot doubt his body. So, the answer to the question, what is Cartesian dualism? Mind and body, two different substances. The question, how does he justify that? He can doubt one, he cannot doubt the other one. All right. Now, let's talk about the subject of today. And first of all, there is a little bit of an introduction to Locke necessary. Talking about, we are now in British Isles in Great Britain rather than on the continent. Remember, Descartes was writing he was born in France. He spent most of his life in Netherlands, in Holland. Was visiting Paris periodically, then going back to Holland. That's all continent. But the British Isles, which, as we mentioned before, gave the beginning to this British empiricism, had quite a different approach to philosophy. And when we start talking about what was going on in the British Isles, the first name we should mention is Isaac Newton. Hopefully you guys all know him from physics, or even from school. He is mentioned many times because he is founder of, you may say, modern physics, although Albert Einstein, of course, is more of a key figure after the 20th century. Nonetheless, if you study physics in school or in college or anywhere, they start with Newtonian physics, so-called Newtonian physics, which is more simple than Einstein's approach and more common sense. This is the key figure for science. He published his Principia Mathematica, which gave us a lot of these modern ideas in 1687, and closely connected to John Locke. In fact, they were friends. They knew each other very well. They visited each other. So while Newton himself is not much of a philosopher, he did publish a little bit about some philosophical issues, but he is more of a scientist than philosopher. John Locke is, of course, a philosopher and an important one. But because of their close connection, we can talk about them together, at least at the beginning. And both of them kind of introduce us to a new period in European history known as Enlightenment. Remember, we were talking about Renaissance last time. Well, now we are in Enlightenment. Opening act of the Enlightenment is considered Locke's essay concerning human understanding, published in 1690. And then Enlightenment kind of goes all the way to Kant and Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, which is almost 100 years later, 1781. That's kind of a final act of the Enlightenment, and after that we will no longer talk about Enlightenment. What is Enlightenment? Well, you can say that Enlightenment is a man's leaving his self-caused immaturity. Man is becoming a grown person. Man as in, humanity, basically. And it is an important moment. The impact of Newtonian science was huge. Even though we talked about Galileo, of course he was important too, we talked about some other scientists, Newton was a key figure. Newton is the first one who really started applying mathematical method and scientific method of building the hypothesis and testing it with experiments and actually getting some very important conclusions, which today we call science. Among other things, he is also father of calculus, so if you take mathematics, they will talk about Newton and Leibniz. Both of them kind of simultaneously came up with calculus, slightly different way, but nonetheless very important contribution to mathematics. And of course in physics, like I said, the Newtonian laws, the law of gravity, and so on are fundamental. Newton was born the same year that Galileo died, 1642. Kind of passed on this, what do they call it, when they run the marathon or something and the next runner gets the stick, passed it on. He himself was rather modest about it. He said, I have seen farther than other scientists. If I have seen farther, it's because I have stood upon the shoulders of giants. And in a way, he's right, of course. Nobody, no genius, no person who we call genius ever invents anything out of thin air. It's always built on, which is also kind of important part to understand about this class in particular. Note that these ideas are all connected. First of all, they're connected to each other. They kind of grow from what was thought and done before. Second of all, they're connected to environment in which these people live, to political situation, to what is going on. Like remember when we talked about Hobbes, civil war in England had huge influence on him. This is necessary in order to truly understand what is philosophy and why it is different, why we don't have one single philosophy which you can just study. Why do we look at all these different ideas? Because they all connected to culture, to the period in history which we talk about, and so on. So Isaac Newton, of course, was more of a scientist, but many philosophers at the time also thought that it may be a good idea to start philosophizing in Newtonian style, to do more or less what Newton was doing with physics in philosophy. And remember, for a long time, philosophy and science was more or less the same thing. So they tried to approach subjects which we today consider more of a philosophical than scientific, with scientific approach. One of these subjects is epistemology. Remember, epistemology is the theory of knowledge. How do we know things? So, just like Newton really thought about reality as these multiple atoms or corpusculas which interact with each other based on the laws, in a similar way, the philosophers, especially John Locke, started thinking about our ideas and the way our mind works as this kind of interaction. Now the whole thing had again huge impact on religion, because we already talked about it with Hobbes. It was becoming more and more of a thing that educated people, at least scientists, people of knowledge, started questioning religion, started questioning these religious postulates, because more and more of what the church was saying, the science told us is actually incorrect. And that naturally created this kind of environment where people were slowly becoming less and less religious. Even though Newton himself was actually a deeply pious Christian. Newton wasn't an atheist by any means. In fact, some of his theories, like the law of gravity and so on, he actually tried to explain it with God and with religious teaching. Nonetheless, note that it's not really as biblical as it was at the beginning. There's another important thing, and by the way, this is how I'm going to be marking it. See, if you see the star and something is in red, you will need to know it for the exam. So pay attention. This is actually one of the questions we have on the review. God of the gaps. So what exactly is God of the gaps? Sometimes it is tempting for the scientists, among others, to explain certain things by God. Why? Well, because we don't have any other explanation. So science does give us explanations about many things, a lot more than it did during, say, medieval times. But it still doesn't answer all the questions, right? So sometimes it's tempting to scientists and to other people just to say, well, you know, we don't have explanation for that, so it must be God. And that's what they call God of the gaps, right? The God is used to fill up the gap in our reasoning. Now that is rather dangerous approach. Why is it a dangerous approach for religion? Well, because what happens later? Science moves on, right? And then some of these questions which we explained by God are also explained by science. And what happens then is people start thinking, okay, well, there was like this, and this stuff which we thought was due to God because we had no explanation, but then part of it was explained by science. So it seems like the remaining part, which we still explaining by God, is not going to be explained by God either. And so that kind of undermines belief in God. And that is what was exactly happening. So again, God of the gaps is the attempt to use gaps within our scientific knowledge as evidence for the necessity of God. Okay, so this is how we can look at the entire process, the way it was developing. Initially, most scientists and philosophers, such as Newton, saw religion and science as co-equal partners. They thought there was no really problem to believe in God and to do science. Now gradually, the viewpoint emerged that the claims of revealed religion should be accepted, but only after they have been trimmed down to conform to scientific outlook. John Locke is already that kind of figure. He started questioning many things which you find in the Revelation, and basically saying, okay, well, it says so in the Bible, but we shouldn't take it literally, because science seems to be telling us this is not the case. Now, what started to emerge is a position known as Deism. We'll talk about Deism a little bit more in a few minutes. Locke can be considered one of the representatives of the Deism. Now, the next stage of the Deism will be Agnosticism, and this is when we actually talk about David Hume. He is considered agnostic. What is an agnostic? A person who basically says, I don't know if God exists or not at all. I cannot say he doesn't exist, as atheists do, but I also do not have any evidence that he does. So kind of taking the more or less neutral position on that question. Maybe there's God, maybe there isn't. And finally, from that, we have this full-blown naturalism or atheism. And that's already more in the 19th century. But again, you can see the progression there. It started from most scientists, if not all of them, actually believing in God, and slowly kind of moved towards fewer and fewer people believing in God. So who was John Locke? He was a physician, as the book also mentions, political advisor, philosopher, born in 1632 in England, already kind of a next generation. Note that he was quite a bit younger than Hobbes, who was still alive but was already a middle-aged man when John Locke was just born. Attended Oxford University as well, just like Hobbes did. Studied there theology, natural science, philosophy, and medicine. Then, just like all of them, remember we talked about Descartes and Hobbes being disappointed with scholasticism, the way they taught at the university at this time. He was also perplexed with it and found it obscure and dealing with useless questions. He thought that this kind of approach is not good. All of them wanted to scrap it up and build it on new foundation. Just like Descartes was doing that in Netherlands, John Locke was doing it in England. Again, a little bit later, because, he was born 1632. Descartes, remember, died 1650. So when Locke was only 18 years old. So again, it's kind of a next generation. He also was there during the Civil War, obviously, even though it started when he was still a child. And he supported the parliament, had to flee to Holland, spend some time there. Then he came back after what they call Glorious Revolution of 1688, when they kind of kicked out one of the monarchs. So the way it was happening actually is first they beheaded Charles I. Then they actually restored his son Charles II. Then they had Jacob I, and they were so unhappy with him. They thought that he was restoring Catholicism, supporting France, that basically ruling classes of Britain, who already had a lot of control, decided to get rid of him too. And Mary, who was his daughter and lived in Holland at the time, was brought back to England and made queen co-monarch with her husband William of Orange. So Mary and William, they kind of replaced Charles, who escaped, ran away, not Charles, James, ran away back to France and no longer was the king, even though they did not behead him. So quite a lot of turbulence was going on during this period. So this is what they call Glorious Revolution, when William and Mary became king and queen. And by the way, that also restricted monarchy even more. Monarchy from then on had really very little power in British politics. Parliament, the will of the people, were ruling, even though they still have monarch today. Elizabeth II, she barely does anything other than, symbolic presence at all these gatherings, opening of the parliament and so on. She does not really have much of a power, and whatever power she even still has, she never uses it. The reason is they have a constitutional monarchy, they have parliament in charge, prime minister, who is basically result of the popular election, is in real charge of the country. Now finally, John Locke died in 1704, but not before. He did publish his essay concerning human understanding, which is that key work opening the Enlightenment. What is the idea behind this book? He himself says in the introduction he was talking to his friends at some point, and they kind of gotten into a very difficult position that they could not agree on so many things. So he thought, how come we all disagree about certain things? How come different people have so different of an opinion about something which you would consider common knowledge, right? We still wonder about that today. Like, again, bringing in some current events, the question of whether or not the last elections were fair, whether or not Donald Trump lost to Joe Biden. Look at it. People completely disagree. You would think that this is like one of those facts which should easily be established. And yet there are people who are absolutely sure that it was unfair and there was some mass manipulation. And there are also people who are absolutely sure that it's not the case and everything was fair. So note that people still disagree about many things today, just like they did back then. So the idea he had is to try and figure out, how do we know things? How do we form all these kind of opinions? What is going on in our head? And also, as he says, to help out scientists such as Newton, he's saying to be employed as under labor in clearing the ground a little, removing some of the rubbish that lies in the way of knowledge. Because it's difficult, note that it's difficult for science and knowledge to exist if we don't even know exactly how do we know. If we can't agree about simple facts, such as who won the election and so on. So naturally, you need some sort of standards there. And he tried to introduce this kind of standards. First of all, he looked in his book at the origin of the ideas. Saying, where do we get the ideas? What the hell is the idea? So he defines idea as the immediate object of perception, thought, or understanding. Object of perception, thought, or understanding. Note, by the way, that he's writing in English, so it's actually easier for us to quote him exactly as he meant it. Okay, what exactly is the immediate object of perception, thought, or understanding? This is still a little broad, and there's a little bit of a disagreement here about what exactly does he mean. He gives examples: whiteness, hardness, sweetness, thinking, motion, man, elephant, army, drunkenness, and others. So essentially, anything you find in your head seems to be like an idea, right? We all know, for example, what whiteness is. We have a word whiteness, but we also have this kind of an idea of whiteness, and that's what he's talking about. But note also he talks about man, motion. This is very broad kind of range of stuff which we are using when we think. All of them he just calls ideas. Okay, he criticizes the idea of innate ideas right away. That is something he does not accept. And remember, he's empiricist. This is the one important difference between what we call today empiricists and rationalists. Descartes was rationalist. He thought there are innate ideas. Can you give an example of one innate idea he thought he has? Anyone? Descartes, what innate idea did he think he had? Should be super easy after the review we did. No? Oh, come on, guys. What idea did he find in his head? I just mentioned it, like, what, 30... None of the gaps. God of the gaps is not an idea. Okay, the idea of God. Yeah, exactly. God. That's what he found there. Remember, God of the gaps we started talking about only when we went to Newton and so on. But we're talking about Descartes. We're talking about last week. He found an idea of God there, and he actually thought that it was there as soon as he was born. That's the point he was making. The idea of God is like the stamp of the Creator on our mind. He thought the idea of God is not something you get from other people. He thought the idea of God is innate, as in it's already there. You're born and you know God. You may not be able to describe it with words yet, but it's already there. So Locke rejects that, and that is one of the fundamental differences between, again, rationalists who think there are such things as innate ideas, and empiricists who think no, there's nothing there. You're born, it's like a clean page. There's nothing there. There's no idea of God. There's no idea of whiteness. There's no idea of any kind. You get these ideas as you grow up. So this is how Locke was explaining it. He's saying no proposition can be said to be in the mind which it never yet knew, which it was never yet conscious of. So that all comes from experience. For example, how do you know what the pen is? Well, when you are born, you don't. And then you see a pen. Somebody holds the pen. And you are still a child, right? So you go, ha ha ha. and you don't even know what it's called. And somebody then later uses the word pen, and then you get an idea of pen, because now you know if somebody shows something like this, that's a pen. And then you start using this word, but the idea came from the object. It wasn't there to begin with. So that's what Locke is saying. All our ideas come from our experiences. We see white things, and then we have the idea of whiteness. Now, naturally, we don't see God, so how does this idea come about? Well, we'll get there in a few minutes. But nonetheless, he thought that was not inborn. So another point which you need to know for the exam. What is his argument against innate ideas? How does he actually prove, or at least thinks he proves, that all these ideas are from experience? None of them are inborn. Well, he uses two-part proof. He's saying, well, for one thing, lots of people were saying, how come then we all agree about them? How come they're universal? If they're so universal, everybody agrees that this is a pen, or about many other things. So if everybody agrees, that must be innate. It must be already there, like mental software of some kind. Now, Locke argues against it by saying, first of all, it's not exactly true. But even if it were true, it would not prove that they are innate, right? You're saying we have the same experiences. We all see the same pens. They may not be like literally the same, but you know what we mean when we call something a pen, right? So that's how we agree on that. And then he also brings another point, number 2, which he says that actually not everybody even agrees on them. Who says everybody agrees? How about children? They don't know what pen is. How about mentally deficient people? These people will never know what pen is. How about people in pre-scientific cultures? If you meet somebody, I don't know, on an uninhabited island or something, well, inhabited by local population, who never saw any civilization, they don't know what pen is. They've never seen pen. They don't write. They don't have paper. So naturally, he's saying that is not true, that they are inborn ideas. Now, he talks about simple and complex ideas in his work, and he says some ideas are actually simple, and the way he describes it is in this, again, very Newtonian way. So just like Newton, remember, Newton and scientists at the time thought that particles, which everything is made of, are like these atoms, the little chunks, right? And they kind of fly around and interact in a variety of ways. More or less a modern view. So he thought the ideas are just like that too. So if you imagine your head to be like a box, right? Empty box. That's when you're born. The idea would be like this little atom, this little simple idea which gets into your head. So let's say it's an idea of a pen. You got an idea of a pen now, you know what it is. Then another idea, let's say of a paper. Again, you experience it, it gets in. Now you have an idea of a paper, and so on. You accumulate all this stuff in your head just like in a box. More and more of them are in there. And once you have a lot of them, you start working on them. So actually, some ideas come from sensation, which is that method here. But some ideas come from reflection. So what does it mean? Well, in your head, you already have this bunch of ideas, right? And you start working on them and like arranging them, putting them together. That's the operation of your mind. So again, that's the another question for the exam. Where do ideas come from? 2 sources: sensation, our experiences, and reflection. And reflection being kind of introspective work of the mind on the ideas which it gotten from sensation. So Locke challenges us. He actually says, let anyone examine his own thoughts and thoroughly search into his understanding, and then let him tell me whether all of the original ideas he has there or any other than of the objects of his senses or the operations of his mind. And how great a mass of knowledge soever he imagines to be lodged there, he will upon taking a strict view, see that he has not any idea in his mind, but what one of these two have imprinted. So he's saying there's really no idea of God inborn into us, or idea of Pan, or any other idea. We are born with absolutely empty mind, like an empty box. Everything comes from these two sources, either the simple ideas we get from outside through sensation, or operations of our mind. For example, when we're hoping, when we thinking about something, we are kind of shoveling these simple ideas around, and we create more complex ideas such as beauty. What is the idea of beauty? Or gratitude? Or a man, an army? This is the examples he actually gives. Beauty. Well, you can't see one thing and say, oh, I have the idea of beauty. But after a while, by seeing many, many different things, you kind of get an idea what beauty is, based on the experience you have of all these various things. So 3 types of mind activity can give us these complex ideas. Compounding, just bulking them together. 2 ideas connected through compounding. Relating. Now that would be stuff like taller or heavier, right? That's what you would say when you have an idea of one object and the other object is heavier than the first one. You have the idea that it is heavier by relating one to the other. And finally, abstracting. That's actually very important one, and that's what we're also going to talk more about next time when we talk about Berkeley. What is the abstracting? Well, we ignore an individual distinctions and leave some sort of general concept. So you see a dog, then another dog, then another dog, then another dog. You're abstracting something from all of them, which is this dogness, idea of dogness you eventually end up with. It's of not of any particular dog, but kind of dog in general, universal type of idea. Now, abstract ideas are complex ideas, and they all come from like this type of infinite work of infinite collection of certain traits from objects. You see many, many objects which look like a book. There's something common amongst all of them, and then you come up with the idea of a book. That's certain power we all have as human beings. Okay, let's discuss this. Let's see what you guys think. Can you come up with an idea or concept we have that he would have difficulty tracing to other sensation? Can you say something, certain idea that is not traced to anything? There's no sensation, there's no experience of anything which can kind of give it a foundation. The feeling of deja vu, but isn't it exactly the experience? Like you have experience of seeing things more than one time, right? So you see something and you think, I must have seen it somewhere before, which is what deja vu is. Isn't it exactly the type of sensation? Like you may say, some people say, I couldn't have seen it before, but I have a feeling like I did. But what if you're just mistaken, right? In some cases, you actually did see it before and you just don't remember that. It's hard to say that you actually never experienced certain thing, period. Hard to be sure about it. The existence of magic. Does magic exist? Well, then that kind of answers it. It doesn't even exist. So the idea here again is what? Can you trace it to experience? Of course, you probably saw the magicians, right? That's where it comes from. And then maybe you can say, I actually believe the magicians. Probably they like really do magic. Or you can say, no, it's all nonsense. But nonetheless, the root of it is an experience. What about dreams? What about dreams? Do you not have an experience of dreams? So you have to understand the question. The question is to find something which has no root in experience, which is not connected to experience, period. the nature of space. Well, you do experience space. How do you explain it? That's a different matter, but it still is based on your experience of space, isn't it? If you've never experienced it, you wouldn't even worry about that. Now, that would be more something along the lines of, I don't know, like people sometimes say unicorn, right? That would be like one of the answers I guess they could give you in, I don't know, medieval times or whatever. Oh, I've never seen unicorn, but how do I have an idea of unicorn? Well, can you explain that? We already talked about it before, right? The idea is you've seen horses and you've seen animals with the horn. So how hard is it for you to actually put them together? Well, existence of ghosts. What exactly is the idea here? The idea of ghost? We are looking for ideas which do not have any base in experience, right? So, have you ever experienced ghost? But note that the answer Locke would probably give to how come I have the idea of ghost if I never experienced ghost? Locke would tell you, well, what is your idea of ghost? And you can say, well, it's just some invisible presence which you can feel sometimes at night or something. And he'll tell you, there you go, you feel it, don't you? You feel it. That's a sensation. That's where it comes from. Well, haven't you experienced the future? I'm sure we all did. Like a week ago today was the future. And there we are now. We're experiencing it. So that actually happens your entire life. That's why you can say there'll be future a few days from now, because there always was. Yeah, that's pretty hard, and essentially he does have a certain point here. Anyway, so he comes to the conclusion, remember, that the answer is you cannot find anything which you've never experienced. All the ideas you have are based on experience. Not directly necessarily because you have never seen unicorns, but indirectly because you've seen horses, you've seen horns, you put it together. You've never seen ghosts, but you felt something in the middle of the night or whatever, and that feeling gave you an idea that maybe there are ghosts. But nonetheless, it comes from your experience. Well, yeah, he would say nothing. I mean, it obviously for other philosophers, there could be different attempts to answer it. And remember what Descartes said. Descartes would say the idea of God, but Locke actually has an answer for that too. Anyway, so remember the primary and secondary qualities. That actually becomes very important because Locke talks about them a lot. Why is it important? Because this is something Berkeley will be talking about. We'll talk about Berkeley's response on Wednesday. But for now, again, remember, this is sign that it will be on the exam, so you need, or might be on the exam. You need to know this. It's on the review. Primary and secondary qualities. What are they? We already mentioned them several times. Primary qualities, they thought at the time, and Locke agreed with that. It comes back to Galileo's idea. Primary qualities, solidity, extension, shape, motion, rest, and number, they thought are primary. What does it mean primary? They are real. They are real qualities of the objects. If you see an object which is triangular, it really is triangular. How about stuff like colors, sounds, tastes, and so on? Now, they called it secondary qualities, and the reason is this. Let's take color. I think it's green, you think it's red. Who is right here? Is it really in the object? And their answer was no. Unlike the shape, unlike the fact that it's triangular, which we all agree upon as long as you are not insane, people disagree about colors, sounds, taste, and so on because they are not real. They are not really in the object. They are kind of like these different illusions which we have provided by properties of the object. So that's what why they distinguish this. We don't do it anymore, and so you don't hear it anymore in science. But at the time they were doing that. They were saying certain properties of objects such as solidity, extension, shape, motion, rest, and number are real. and certain properties or qualities are not real. They are secondary qualities that actually is more in us. So he was saying these ones are objective, and these ones are subjective, meaning depend on the subject. So if you argue with somebody over objective stuff, you can easily check that out. You would say whether it's triangular or not, as long as you see the object, you can agree. But whether it tastes good, wow, how many people would agree on that? Some people would agree, but many people would disagree. Somebody would say it tastes good, the other people would say it tastes bad. Similarly, he thought about colors and sounds. They are not as objective. Note an interesting thing though, they have number here. They thought that the important difference is in how you can measure them. So they thought that things such as extension, for example, you can measure it, right? You can say it is 3 feet long. What they thought was different about colors and sounds is you cannot measure them. Now the funny part is, of course, today we have digital colors and we have digital sounds, so we actually discovered that you can measure them. It's just a more sophisticated mathematical method, but nonetheless you can take bunch of stream of numbers such as 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, 0 and so on, and have a color, and it will look to you like color green, which is exactly what your cell phones do and the computer screens do. They only receive numbers, but they give you colors. Now back then they thought that was impossible. They thought that was a fundamental difference. Foundationalism, well, I'm not sure how it's related to foundationalism, but yeah, they would say that the color you feel, and it's actually something in you rather than in the object. It reflects how you as a human being perceive the object, rather than it really is there. Now, for us, it's kind of easier to see what's going on with the taste, because some people feel taste bitter, other people feel the taste sweet, and so on. But even with colors, like we all agree about color red being the color of the light, traffic light, which you're not supposed to drive, right? Now, here's a question though. How do you know other people see the same color as you? Imagine if what other people actually see is green. They call it red because they use the same word. And they know when they see it, they're not supposed to drive. But how would you ever compare it to them? You see it as red, they see it as green, you both call it red, and you both can recognize this color. It just looks different to them, right? Unless you can sneak into their head and find out, and you can't, right? How would you ever know? Well, he never really doubted that. He, as an experiment, he said that if there was such a malicious demon, which he later discovered there wasn't, he could possibly do it so that you could even be mistaken about 2 + 2 = 4, which theoretically is possible, right? Let's say you have a computer which always make a mistake. Every time you put 2 + 2, it always gives you 5. Now, if that was the only computer, that would be a problem, because other computers would not do that kind of calculation. But if all computers were like that, you could actually think it's normal. This is what's supposed to be happening. So in that sense, that's what Descartes thought, that people may be mistaken, but since we all mistaken, we think that's actually true, as long as there is this demon who can deceive us about that. Anyway, so what knowledge do ideas produce? That is probably one of the most important questions. According to Locke, knowledge is the perception of connection and agreement or disagreement and repugnancy of any our ideas. So think about it. What he's saying is this. When you say, I know this, that means that that particular knowledge fits into the picture with other ideas. So, just to give you an example. if you say, I know there's a cat in the box, what does that mean? It means that if you open the box, you will find the cat. So your idea of then there being a box should correspond to your idea of you opening the box and then there being this furry animal. And if you open it and there's nothing, or if there's, I don't know, a stone, then that would be a problem. That means the one idea will not fit with the other one. So that would mean you don't have knowledge. Knowledge, in other words, is just this kind of good fit between your ideas. So, based on that, you can have different degrees of knowledge. Intuitive knowledge, what he called, that would be the most certain one. So, for example, if you see 1 plus 2, you know it is 3. There is no doubt about that whatsoever. Locke called it intuitive knowledge. This is knowledge which kind of comes from intuition immediately. When we see 1 plus 2, what do we have? 3. No problem. There, second type of knowledge, he would say, is demonstrative knowledge. Now, demonstrative knowledge, we don't have like that. We can't immediately see it. We can only know it if we actually connect some ideas together. So it's kind of a longer chain, right? The angles of a triangle add up to 180 degrees, he would say, is an example of demonstrative knowledge. Why? Well, because if you look at the triangle, you cannot say right away it's 180 degrees. But if you measure it, you can actually figure it out. And there's a third type of knowledge which he called sensitive knowledge. Sensitive knowledge is all the judgments we make based on experience. An example again would be that there's a cat in a box. Sensitive knowledge is not as certain as these two. It actually is only probable. Why? Well, because we can never have a complete certainty about our senses. Our senses can lie to us. You may say, well, if I open the box and there's a cat, is there any chance I could be wrong? Well, what do you think? Is there any chance you could be wrong? Yes, such as, for example, or maybe you're dreaming or hallucinating. That's one example. Note that even if you're dreaming, it's unlikely that you could have an experience when 1 plus 2 will not be equal 3. I don't think we do much math in our dreams, but if we do, it should still come to 3. And similarly with other things which based on mathematics and so on. This type of reasoning, even in your dreams or in your hallucinations, should be coming up the same. But with stuff which comes from experience, it's not as simple. This distinction, by the way, if you take Philosophy 102, it actually we still make it, we talk about certain things which can have a deductive knowledge of and inductive knowledge. Deductive knowledge, mathematics, an example of deductive knowledge, so something like 10 plus 5 equal 15, right? That is not something which you can ever be wrong about, and this is what is known as deductive. Inductive knowledge based on these senses. So knowing whether there's a cat or whether there is some other animal always is open to a mistake, probability of mistake. Anything coming from your senses could be wrong. You can have very high probability, but you can never have like completely 100%. So what are the primary ways of knowing? We actually can truly know very few things. Mathematics mainly. All the other things which we know from experience can always be wrong. And that is one important thing that Locke has actually determined. And again, today we do agree with him. Most things which we know, such as, again, who won the election, come from experience, and we could be wrong about them. Clearly some people are wrong about them, right? Because half of the, well, I don't know if it's half of the country, but many millions of people think that elections were fair. Many millions of people think that they were not. Well, it is definitely some sort of a fact, but since it's based on your experience, that cannot be truly known. How do you know about these things? Well, mostly from authority of other people. You gather information, you make your best judgment based on all this stuff, right? So that's open for a mistake. That's why some people say, yes, it is definitely a fact, and other people say, no, it definitely is not. Okay, and most things are like that. Now, in general, the position of Locke is known as representative realism, and that is the representative realism. Note that again, this is for the exam, you should know that. It's the claim that the mind is directly acquainted only with its own ideas. So note that this is what he is saying. Your mind has all these ideas. You have a direct access to them, right? They are in your mind. Whether or not these ideas correspond to reality, that's a different story. Representative realism, why it's realism, says they do, but you don't know that for sure. The question there obviously is, well, if you don't know that for sure, why do you think they do? Well, the realist will tell you, well, because it makes sense. It makes sense that there is real world. It makes sense that I'm holding real pen. So Locke doesn't go very deeply into the question, how sure am I? He's saying, well, you cannot be completely sure, but you're reasonably sure. And he's saying, we don't have any reason to doubt that there are real objects around us. Nonetheless, we don't have access to them. What do we have access to? Only our ideas. Do you guys understand what he means? Your mind is thinking, right? And you only have access to these thoughts. You have access to the thought that there is a pen in my hand. Do you have the actual access to the pen? No. The only way you could have access to the pen is if you somehow come out of your mind and then touch the pen or something without using your mind. And that would be a complete contradiction. That's literally impossible. But note that it kind of opens the door here. And this is the door into which Berkeley and many other, who we call idealists, go in. Here's the question. The idea is this. Our mind is like, suppose this is a room, right? And this is like our mind. Suppose this is a person who sits in this room. There is a world outside. But the person doesn't know this world. It only is given pictures of this world. It has these pictures. A picture of a tree, a picture of a man. This is the ideas, right? This is your mind. The ideas are like pictures of these objects. Your senses kind of bring them to you, and you have, oh, okay, I have an idea of a pen, I have an idea of this and that. Now, in real world, how do you know the picture of something is really of something? Because you can compare them, right? You've seen it before. How do you know it's the picture of your uncle? Well, I've seen my uncle. I know what he looks like. So if somebody hands me a picture of my uncle and says, this is your uncle, I actually can make a judgment based on my experience. I can say, yeah, looks like my uncle. What's the problem with this situation about the world? You've never seen the world outside of your mind. All you have access to is inside your mind. So the question can be asked, how do you know there really is, let's say, a table out there? Let's say it's a table, right? If all you have is the thinking and the idea of a table in your head, that's the only thing you truly have access to. You do not have access directly to this table. Well, again, Locke himself thinks it just makes sense that there is a table. Why would we ever doubt there is a table? There's no reason to doubt that. How does Descartes, by the way, answers that? Remember, how does Descartes tell you, how do we know there is actually a table there? No, we did talk about it at the beginning of class. Again, that's again something we mentioned specifically, and somebody got extra credit for that. Because perfect God would not lie. That's how he said. If God tells you there is a table, there got to be a table there. That's how Descartes thought. Note that Locke does not explain it with God because he thinks the very idea of God is just like any other idea. We didn't get it from God. It was not there to begin with. We made it ourselves based on our experiences. So even though he thinks there is God, he does not believe that the idea of God comes from God. Descartes did. And that actually then raises the doubt here, because you can say, wait a minute. So how still do we know there is a table? Descartes thought God guarantees that. Who guarantees that to Locke? And the answer is nobody. He just thinks there is a table, that's it. So when we talk about Berkeley and Hume, you will see why they started questioning that. Locke himself did not question that. So his, again, explanation of how do we know there are real objects is, well, as long as our ideas fit together well enough, then they should be there. There is no problem. Okay, so then let's discuss this a little bit too. Do you agree with Locke that your mind is directly acquainted only with its own ideas? Do you think that actually is the case? Let's do the poll here. Do you agree with Locke or not? Yes or no? Okay, so 9 people agree and 2 people disagree. Interesting. So you disagree. That means that you have access to objects other than through your ideas. Can you elaborate? How do you access them then? The means to make it? Like you imagine it and then you make it? Wait, but if you imagine it, isn't it your idea? So first it's your idea of imagining it, and then it's your idea of making it. When do you actually have access to the object itself and not to your idea? Oh yeah, but isn't internet again an idea? Note the difference between an idea and an object. Idea is in your head. You have an idea of an object. Object is not in your head. You don't have pen in your head unless somebody, broke your skull and stuck a pen in there. How would you ever have an access to actual pen? Your mind works with the idea of a pen based on what? On your senses, right? Your sense of touch gives you a particular feed. Your sense of eyesight gives you a particular feed. Your ears give you a feed, and so on. And then you, based on that, say, okay, there must be a pen there. When did you ever access this pen itself without any of this stuff involved? In previous life or something? Well, basically that's the argument Locke is making. He's saying you never did, you can't. You only have access to your ideas. So, do you believe your idea is actually representative of the objects? As in, what your idea of a pen, does it actually match the actual pen out there or not? Let's do another poll on that. Do you think your ideas match the objects? Yeah. So, actually, but did not publish those results. I don't really see them. But yeah, most people think that, yes. Well, it's kind of common sense, but imagine this. What if the actual objects are 2 times smaller than you think they are? But nonetheless, wouldn't you still be able to think that they are the size they actually are? There's a better example, actually. Do you know that we see things upside down? Our eyes actually work in the way you see things upside down, and your mind kind of turns it back around. So the way it works is if they give you glasses which turn things upside down again, after a while you will stop noticing the fact that it's turned upside down. They actually did these experiments in psychology. Why? Because your mind will turn it back the way it is supposed to be. Similarly, if you saw the entire world in any kind of distorted way, you would get used to it after a while, and that would be normal to you, a new normal. it would not preclude you from operating with this world. Unless you really saw it different from other people, and then of course that could create problems. But if not, if that is not something which affects your behavior against other people, you would just adjust to it. If all people together saw some sort of distorted reality, they would never know it's distorted, because who would have told them? They all agree about that. But maybe reality is not like this. This is actually where it gets us closer to Kant and the way he explained it. He had a very interesting explanation, and we'll talk about it next week. But the point here is this: how do we ever know that we experience reality the way it really is? And the answer is, we don't really. I mean, we assume that, because it works for us. But whether reality really is like that, we have no idea. Okay. If we had some sort of aliens come from outer space and explain it to us and say, you know what, you all guys wrong. That's actually not how things look like. Then we could be like, ooh, can you prove it? But we don't have any aliens. There's nobody but us. So if we all are mistaken about how things really look, if we all see red color and think it's green, we would never know. Nobody would be able to tell us. Okay, couple of other important things. This is also something you need to know for the exam. The substance, our good old friend, the substance. Locke actually said that there must be such thing as the substance, matter, right? Something there, something which is behind all the objects, something which objects consist of, you may say. But when asked, what is it that this substance, what is everything made of, he said, I have no idea. He said, I don't know what it is. I just know there's something there, because it kind of gives me resistance when I hit it with my hand and stuff. So there gotta be something there, matter of some sort. But I don't know what it is. So that would be, of course, material substance, right? Now, how about mental substance or spiritual substance? Remember, Descartes made the distinction. So Locke again agreed that there is such thing as spiritual substance, because he said, well, we also have an idea of ourselves. Descartes is right about that. But it's just as clear as the idea of physical substance. In other words, it's not clear at all. We again don't know what it is. We just know there's something like that, because there is something indeed doing the thinking. But what is it? What is it real me? I don't know. Nobody knows. So that's what he said about the idea of a substance, but we actually don't know what it is. And finally, how did he think the God? What about the idea of God? He was saying, well, we kind of make it up. We make it up by enlarging every one of our properties. So how, remember, Descartes was saying, how can we have the idea of perfect God? Well, we have the idea of perfection. If something is better than this other thing, and the other thing is better than the other thing, and the other thing is better than that thing, we can imagine things being infinitely better. And so we say, well, there is an infinitely perfect thing, and that's God. We can't really understand it with our head, but we can just imagine this kind of idea. So that's what he says, the origin of the idea of God. We simply make it ourselves. We increase our idea of beauty to some sort of infinite degree and say, well, there must be something infinitely beautiful, something infinitely good, something infinitely this and that. And that is how we come up with the idea of God. Note that he's not an atheist. He's not saying there is no God. He's just saying the idea of God did not come from God. What came from God? Well, God created the world, just like the Bible says. But the idea of God is not in our mind from God. We kind of make it up ourselves. What really is God, we actually don't know, and we can't know that. So he had a rather substantial influence on Deism. And again, what is Deism? We mentioned it already. Deism is a system of thought based on reason, which acknowledges the existence of God and its creation, but denies that God interferes in the world. Again, this is for the review. So this is what deism is. You say, yes, there is God, but he actually does not create any miracles. He does not change things the way we leave them. So deists were saying God created the world, and the world now works like this kind of a clock, right? It follows these laws. And note that this is exactly what Newton was doing. He's saying, if we figure out these laws, we can actually know what will happen. Not because there is no God, but because that's how God set things up. The laws come from God. But God himself does not change those laws. They're already there. The law of gravity is there. God will not change the law of gravity, so next time you let go of the pen, it will fly up. He just doesn't do that. So this is what deism is. God created the world and then kind of stopped interfering with anything. Okay, the political, we actually don't have much time for that. We have to wrap it up. Anyway, if you take political science or something, they will talk more about his ideas because they were actually very fundamental to classical liberalism. The basic idea there is that the government should be responsible to the people and not the way Hobbes thought about it. So remember, we were talking about Hobbes. For Hobbes, government should rule by force. We need government because without government there is chaos. So any government is better than no government at all. For Locke, that's not the case. For Locke, the government should be responsible to the people, and people actually have a right to rebel. They have right for revolution if the government does not follow what they thought it's supposed to do. So that's actually Locke had a huge influence on the founding fathers of American Revolution. That's one of the ideas behind the Constitution we have. But government should be responsible to the people. Okay, labor theory of property or value. Yeah, he also thought that the way property works is if you put your labor into it, then it's your property. So natural resources such as land, trees and so on, they belong to everybody and nobody. But once you took it and made a table out of the tree, that's what made it your property because you put your labor into that object. So this is new as well. Okay, I guess that's all the time we have. We're already a little bit over. Very influential, again, for our democracy and liberalism and so on. So quite a lot of interesting stuff, but in terms of philosophy, right now we are mainly interested in his epistemology, in his theory of knowledge. And next time we'll talk about Berkeley, who actually picked up on him and gave very interesting answers, but kind of from a different point of view. Locke as a realist, Berkeley will be idealist. He will be questioning all these assumptions in a rather ingenious way. Okay, so that's all the time we have. I will see you on Wednesday.